The following is an interview with Rex Parker, director of the Amateur Astronomers Association of Princeton. It was recorded at his home observatory in the summer of 2020. So you mentioned a little bit earlier in our interview about some other places you've shot. Can you maybe tell us some of the highlights of those experiences, perhaps Mount Lemmon, and any places that you recommend to amateur enthusiasts?
Well, some of you may be aware there are these horrible forest fires down at Mount Lemmon in the Tucson area right now, and I really shuddered when I've seen some of these images online just the last couple of days, because that's exactly where the Mount Lemmon Sky Center sits, on the top of Mount Lemmon, just to the north side of Tucson. And I've been there several times, most recently this summer, an excursion with my wife and some friends to do visual astronomy. But I have to give credit to Adam Block, who's a well-known name, sort of a guru in the field of amateur astrophotography, how to do it and how the software meshes with the hardware, and in particular the image processing side of it. So I actually went to Mount Lemmon for advanced imaging workshops twice in the maybe 7 years ago, and then about 5 years ago, and took a multi-day course where he actually resided at the dorms on the top of Mount Lemmon and worked in the observatory with Adam for several days in a row. And really it just took me from up down here to really this level, and changed it for me forever, really, because I figured some things out. He showed me how to do some things that I hadn't been aware of in terms of image processing and reduction of noise. So that's gone really a long way to allow me to apply those learnings in my own setting here. Similarly, I've been very fortunate to get access to a great telescope up on the top of Cerro Tololo at the CTIO, the Cerro Tololo Inter-American Observatory down in Chile in the Andes at about 9,500 feet. And here I was fortunate to have made, I guess I could say, make friends with a really well-known astrophotographer, Steve Maslin, who lives over in Bucks County. We actually had him into the club for a presentation several years ago, and having brought him in and hosted him for that evening sort of led to another, and a few years after that he approached me about they had a slot in their imaging group, and so I joined a group of 4 or 5 guys who, for let's just say a considerable sum of money, coin of the realm, gets you access, in this case, to an academically owned observatory telescope, part of a project that's being run by Dr. Dan Reichert of the Department of Astronomy and Physics at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill, and actually went down to visit Dan at his place in the planetarium offices on the campus. Beautiful campus too, if you've been down there. But they run a remote operation, and they've been the champions of something called Skynet. Skynet is a collection of telescopes all over the world, so it includes the cluster on CTIO. So back to the point, my group, Steve Maslin's group, we call it Star Shadows Remote Observatory, and we have access to a 16-inch RC telescope inside a dome up on the mountain at Cerro Tololo, and we have basically half-time access for the fees that we're spending for it. So basically it's an annual contract. We get the dark half of the lunar cycle, so we get 1 week before through 1 week after the new moon every month. Having said that, sadly, like every other operation around the world right now, it is shut down entirely because of the COVID situation, so we have not been able to access data since early March. But that's been a significant part of the learning curve, because now we're talking about a really, really high-end camera, a full frame type CCD with RGB filtering and also hydrogen alpha and oxygen 3 and so forth. So there's a lot of capabilities at that level. That telescope, interestingly enough, was built for a project having to do with seeking the optical counterpart of gamma ray bursters, the enigmatic gamma ray bursts that occur all over outside of our galaxy. And so after running that project for many years, basically it became available for other things, and I think Dr. Reichert realized this was a good way to help supplement their research budget by, if you will, farming out the scope to amateurs like us. So that's been a great experience for me in terms of the learning curve, and also figuring out how to manipulate really large images and really deep images where we'll literally go 50 hours, 60 hours on a single object, split into 4 filters, RGB and luminance, of course, but maybe 20 hours of luminance and typical subframes of 30 minutes. So you can imagine the data that's coming in. It is a bit like drinking from the fire hose there. Well, there are a lot of cool things going on inside the observatory here. When you look around, there's a lot of hardware. There's a lot of, looks like high-end equipment. Certainly it is. I would mention at the beginning, almost everything in here was made in America. How about that? I would say that I did keep that in mind when I was acquiring equipment, but nonetheless, the pedestal is made by a craftsman out in Pasadena, California, Advanced Telescope Systems. This is a made-to-custom order aluminum cast pedestal that's sitting on a concrete pedestal that goes down into the ground 3 feet to vibration isolate the observatory from the scope. Sitting on top is an S-Big MX, Paramount MX mount. The MX is the littler brother of the MEs that we have out at the AAAP Washington Crossing Observatory. It has a capacity of about 90 pounds payload, and you can see with the counterweights on the end here, there's about 70 pounds of counterweight, so I'm somewhere in the neighborhood of 70 pounds on the business end over here. The telescope is a semi-custom design made by AG Optical, which is out of Huntsville, Alabama, and a craftsman down there started making really fine optical instruments about 10-12 years ago. Now the design of this telescope, it is a Cassegrain reflector, 12.5-inch mirror. F ratio is f6.7, so that's a pretty fast scope for a 12-inch reflector. It has what they call modified Dahl-Kirkham design, which is a type of Cassegrain where there's glass elements in the optical train before the light comes out here that correct the figure of the optical path, so it makes an exceedingly flat field. This telescope is capable of illuminating a full frame CCD or 35 millimeter film size frame, which is quite an accomplishment. Some of you have probably heard of Planewave, which was a company out in California spun off from some Celestron engineers. They're making a similar design, so this scope is very much like a Planewave design, modified Dahl-Kirkham. So the light from the distant galaxy coming through the scope, emerging on the side where our imaging train exists. I've had a lot of different configurations here. I'll talk about this one in a second, but formerly, for many, many years, I've used an S-Big CCD camera. This was one of the most famous cameras, still is one of the best cameras. They use the sensor in this, which is a KAF 3200 CCD, has the highest quantum efficiency of any chip even to this day. A monochrome sensor, which therefore requires in front of the sensor itself part of the camera. It's actually attached as if it were one unit, but there is a filter wheel in here that allows the location or the movement of red, green, blue, hydrogen alpha, oxygen 3 transparent filters for your luminance frame, so you can do RGB imaging. And in that technique, you take images of an astronomical object for whatever your length of frame is. You're going to repeat that multiple times with each filter, finally creating an assembly of data files that you're going to recombine in software to make an RGB or an L for luminance, LRGB image. Now I've found that for really high quality sky situations like down in Chile or Mount Lemmon, this type of a camera is by far the best way to go. There are a lot of reasons for that, but in the situation we have here in New Jersey and the East Coast, let's face it, we're dealing with a lot of light pollution. We're dealing with gradients of light in the sky, sometimes enhanced by the moon, made worse by clouds, certainly made worse by Trenton's lights in Philadelphia and New York. And that means that you don't have the same situation. You don't have the ability to assemble, you don't have the ability to acquire the lengthy frames that doing RGB imaging may need. Furthermore, color balancing and getting rid of gradients from each of those different color filters can be very, very challenging. Not that it can't be done. I spent years doing this, but I found an easier solution. And this is one that I recommend to club members to think about going in this direction. So sitting here is a color CMOS camera, sometimes called a one-shot color, but really it's the same technology that exists in your DSLR cameras or really little handheld, tiny little cameras, cell phone cameras. Same technology, but with a sensor and electronic controls designed for astronomical application. So again, you can use your DSLR, get the right bracket to connect it to the imaging train here, and you'll do just fine with it. But I prefer to go with something that has cooling. And cooling does make a difference in suppressing the dark current source of noise that a sensor will pick up. And the longer you go, you basically over seconds, over minutes of time of accumulating any single frame, you're also accumulating dark current noise. you're also accumulating noise from the sky background. You're accumulating that background blanket of light. It turns out that the longer you go in your exposure, the more you become limited by the background ambient sky glow. So when all is put together, if you're trying to go deep, there's going to be a length of time which you probably don't want to go longer. For me, with this setup, I do typically 12-minute frames with this one-shot color camera. An APS-C size sensor, which a lot of the sort of intermediate level cameras are using. A relatively large sensor, much like twice as large, 3 times as large as the ones we were talking about before with the little Starlight Express camera. But this telescope is designed to give a flat, perfect field on that large of a sensor, so it works out very well. I will typically acquire 12 or 15, maybe even 20, but probably not more than that, 12-minute subframes with this camera on, let's say, a galaxy or a nebula that are in the sky most seasons of the year. To pick your favorite target and go with it, and you'll find that you've got enough signal and you've minimized the noise contribution as much as you can to probably reach an optimal final image. So again, about maybe 12 to 20 12-minute subframes. So you're talking 2 to 3 hours of total data, not necessarily more than that. And I'm reaching a level of quality in the images that I can reach pretty similar as going maybe 15 hours with the CCD RGB method. There are limits, and it's never going to be as good as Chile, but hey, it's pretty good for the New Jersey skies using this equipment. So I have to say, this is the way to go, whether you have a big scope or a little scope. Having a one-shot color, given the circumstances we have with our skies, I think you're going to achieve much better results. But doesn't mean that there aren't some tricks that you need to learn with the software to eliminate those noise elements that are built into your data. When you get the image frames, you're going to look at them, and your first glances, you're going to go, oh, wow, what am I doing wrong? But no, each image frame belies the wealth of details there if you can learn the techniques of eliminating the sources of noise and combining the images and aligning them properly using software to create that final mean image. Okay, so you may be wondering, what are all these cables dangling around, and how do you work your way through this sort of maze of spaghetti? Well, a couple of these cables are here as extra cables to allow me to rapidly connect a second camera if I want to swap it out. So don't worry about these. Some of these cables are controlling the telescope. It has some advanced features for dew control and mirror temperature control. It has built-in heaters and a built-in fan, and these are part of that sensing apparatus and control mechanism. That's up here. These cables, the camera itself, as well as the little Starlight Expresses, and really all the modern cameras on the market today, are working through USB connections to your computer. In this case, I have a USB 3 cable going to a PC desktop computer, believe it or not, running Windows 8. I still run Windows 8, and it handles it just fine, running the control software. A guide camera over in the back side, you may not be able to see it, but there's a second small telescope in the back, which is a refractor used for auto guiding, which is another layer of control so you can really track in the sky accurately. And again, the USB cables going through, some of the cables are going through the mount just to minimize the mess and coming to the computer over here. Now, the software aspect of it is a very important mating. You want to match your software to your hardware. There's a number of things out there, and what I'm using is the Sky 10, the same program that the club uses out at the Washington Crossing setup. The Sky 10 has a lot of capabilities. We only use half of it out there. In fact, it has the ability to control cameras as well as be a planetarium program and control the scope's motion and slewing to objects in the sky. I also use Maxim DL, which is a very, let's say, an honorable program that goes way back and has been through a lot of evolution of the very field of amateur astronomy itself. The company that owns Maxim, Diffraction Limited, in fact now owns SBIG, the maker of this other camera that I was showing, and a number of you have heard of it. It's actually a famous name in astronomy now. I recommend Maxim DL as well for scope control and camera control as well as for processing. So regardless of exactly which software you're using to get the data, and I should say if you're using EAA, if you're doing the video technique, you're really just using Starlight Live or SharpCap or ZWO Capture software to do the imaging. You may save those images to your disk even whilst you're doing video astronomy, save a few frames to your disk and go back and process them later. So this idea of post-processing requires another layer of software. Some of it can be done in the software we just mentioned. These software programs have a lot of capability. If you get really serious about it, you're going to want something that is able to really process the raw frames in a really facile manner, because you're going to start dealing with more and more image subframes, and the requirements are going to get a little bit harder. A lot of stuff out there. I'll just tell you what I'm using. CCD Stack is a software made by CCDware company. Very cleverly designed, excellent program. CCD Stack to take the raw images, calibrate them by removing the dark signal and the bias frame. And I haven't talked about flat framing, but another aspect of the, let's say, the noise in your system can be taken out by flat framing. And these software packages allow you to remove that from the data that you've stored on your computer, the image subframes that you captured during your session. CCD Stack, Maxim DL, even the Sky 10 can do this, and you really want to invest in software. It's not necessarily cheap. I mean, several $100s, not necessarily thousands, but you don't want to skimp on this because it's a very important element of what you're trying to achieve. Once you get to that point, and certainly we can talk later in more detail about how you reach that point, you may want to go to a final level of, let's say, perfecting your image by using something like Photoshop, which is what I actually use for the later stages of image processing, color balancing, enhancing the saturation of the color, things like this.
This has been an interview with Rex Parker, Director of the Amateur Astronomers Association of Princeton, and produced by member Rich Sherman. Founded in 1962, the Amateur Astronomers Association of Princeton is a non-profit organization that promotes a wide range of astronomy-related activities, including solar, planetary, and deep sky observing, astrophotography, star parties, lectures, and education. The group owns and operates its observatory at Washington Crossing State Park in New Jersey. For more information about the club and its outreach activities, please visit www.princetonastronomy.org.